Afternoon all. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me as ever. Now, what's exciting is I've not even realized it until like this morning, but next week we are booked out for guests. It'll be our first, all being well, our first week in which, although it wasn't my intention, it's going to be a week full of guests, which is going to be absolutely brilliant. It also means that I'm going to double down on, I had this intention of episodes that we were going to do in between guests for the next couple of weeks on this war against conviction. And I was sort of saying about how we can make sure we introduce it inquisitive natures and ambiguity without completely leaving ourselves stripped bare. So it means that today and possibly even tomorrow I might double down on some of those topics, because next week, yes, absolute who's who of guests. So what I'm going to try out is it's the first week of the month, and so we're going to try out what I said yesterday, which was marketing Mondays, well-being Wednesdays, and finance Fridays. Certainly doubling down on especially a private practice centric element, although should apply to everyone, of course. But yeah, Michael Schumacher's joining me on Monday, and then on Tuesday we've got John Ware coming on, Election Day special. He's going to be talking about sort of his take on the American election, US election, and from the right of politics, approaching it more so than say Sandy, who was more from the left of politics last week. So thank you to him for joining me. We had a bit of a glitch. He was meant to be on this week, but just daylight savings type situation had disrupted things. So he's coming on Tuesday. On Wednesday, well-being Wednesdays. Oh, I don't know if I got a definite thumbs up. I'm just going to double check. I'm about to potentially lump her in. I haven't got a definite confirmation, but hopefully we've got a special guest on for Wednesday who's going to join me for Wellbeing Wednesday. Thursday, Becky's joining. Becky, aka Betty from the Massage Collective, the Massage Matters podcast. She's going to be joining me to talk a little bit about the application and reforming standards there. But then on Friday, we've also got Obi Hassan, who's are going to be hopefully our resident financial consultant, talking a little bit about how you can better manage money and some of the variables that exist in that space. So that's exciting for next week. Means that we're sort of jam-packed with guests. But today, I really wanted to sort of get stuck into. I really want to get stuck into this conviction thing, both for you guys live to comment on, but also for those that listen after the fact. We've had some really interesting comments come off the back of, I think it was Monday's show, about why people wanting to sort of give my opinion as to why people double down around being convinced when fundamentally things are clearly far more ambiguous. And people were interested in my take on the fact that sometimes it's just that people sometimes are convinced and it's their ego showing, and sometimes it's people that are otherwise unconvinced, but then they feel like they need to front up and be suggesting that they know the answer when they maybe don't. Lovely comment here. Cuddly greetings to Test and Control. Yeah, I mean, people, certainly I'm the least interesting member of my family these days. I think I always was. My rather talented wife, but now that we've got the little boys, those that don't know, got twin boys that we jokingly call Test and Control on the internet. Didn't christen them that name. You'll be pleased to know. Well, didn't christen them. That helps. But yeah, that's not their actual names, I promise. But yeah, I've got a video that just went out on Twitter. If you want to have a look at them playing, they were being all giggly yesterday, which was cute. So yeah, our twin boy's now 10 months old, so they're rather entertaining. Also, the reason why you'll be seeing me looking disheveled. I had a bit of a shave this morning, but I noticed on yesterday's stream someone was mentioning that I'm looking particularly tired. Absolutely, no shit. And I'll be probably touching on that at some point as well, the consequences of sleep deprivation. Maybe I could do a show on that. But what I wanted to touch on today is a sort of fairly, I don't know how spicy a take it is from me, this, but I've got sort of an opinion as to why I've noticed some people that I really love and admire, and friends of mine and family members even, that sort of have gone this way in recent years, where they felt like they needed to have a particularly strong opinion that is spread then across so many topics that they clearly haven't been able to sort of specialize or really understand the facts of the matter in and around. And so I've come to understand one of the things that I think is going on there that I think we need to look out for and potentially try to counter and be more thoughtful about, because I think this is one of the things that I've been concerned where people can be quite tribal, not just in industry now, but broadly, these divisive things that can sort of draw us apart, be that politically, religiously, in healthcare or on a particular policy, environmentalism. You basically ended up with these sort of tribal factions, and speaking past each other. And there's so many theories and so many books been written that are by people far smarter than me on this. But one of the things that I've come to sort of see this through is a particular lens in and around why people will lean on ideology rather than reason, and how sometimes it's because we're overwhelming ourselves with expectation as to how we can go about understanding things. It's sometimes why people succumb to it. So let me sort of spit this out, and then I'll see if any of you guys have got any thoughts and feelings on this as well. But basically, I've got a problem, for those that didn't tune into Monday, I've got a problem with deep conviction, especially when people haven't necessarily given it thought. I use the example of saying when someone is sort of convinced of something and then a very basic counter argument gives them pause for thought, and they say, oh, I've not thought about it like that. And I just said in that show, and I'll say it again, I can't think of anything more embarrassing than being convinced of something, but then not having, you're convinced of it despite not ever grappling with a basic counter narrative. That for me is sort of frightful, and certainly something I see a lot of, even among smart people that are otherwise fairly reasonable in particular topics, but then convinced of something in another. And I've got a theory as to why. So let me sort of unpack this and see what you think. So thank you again for tuning in live, and feel free to post your comments. But I am going to just hide the chat box for a second, because we get comments coming in from YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So thanks for joining. But yeah, I'm just gonna pitch this to you for a second. So give me your thoughts as it happens. Now, the big one is that when you think about complex topics that are multifaceted, and you think about them across it could be across various different ranges. So you've got people that have got an opinion on manual therapy, they've got an opinion on pain and injury, and they can be linked. You've got opinion on broad healthcare policy and how things could be constructed in terms of taxation-funded universal healthcare versus private sector, and how those things could interact, right? These are just layers of complexity. You've then got something that's distant from healthcare. You've then got broader macro politics in terms of how the party systems might work, or the operating systems, whether you're a fan or not of sort of democracy or other things. You've got various different opinions as to where free speech should be limited. You've got opinions on broad censorship. You've got opinions on the role of state, right? I'm just adding layers of different things here. But what I'm getting at here is that although I'm well aware there's plenty of people smarter than I am, and that people have got a better bandwidth than me potentially for certain things, but what I see is that when you've got someone that is not able to necessarily stretch themselves and understand the facts of the matter and the who's and ahs and the nuances around each of those different things. I've just reeled off 5 complex topics, what I perceive to be complex topics, at least when I've at least had a cursory glance or studied the broader philosophy of it and understood how things map onto it. When people can't necessarily get across all those facts, or maybe don't have an interest in it, maybe they've got an interest in a couple out of those 5, then when you aren't able to go at things on a case-by-case basis, then I think that some people, not all, but some people, and this is a habit that is not inherent to people, but I'm just meaning that I think that people are feeling obliged to have a strong opinion or take a side on so many things, that instead of being like, well, I know much on this stuff, but actually I don't know enough of the facts of the matter on this stuff. Because they can't get across those topics because of, they've got other things to do, they might not be interested, etc. But they're being obliged into not saying, I don't really know much about that. Then instead of being able to get across those topics and think, well, let me try and get the facts together, that's when they lean on some sort of base heuristic or ideology. So instead of, even though they don't necessarily know the facts of the matter in a particular area, instead of what I think maybe at a core, even 5-10 people just be like, I don't know enough about that, right? They then just decide to then do one of 2 things that are linked. They just to people that they know and trust, that agree with them 1, 2, 3, and they think, right, I suspect I'll agree with them on point if they thought about me, and therefore I'm just going to parrot their opinion, right? Because they're on my tribe, therefore it's going to defer. It's like a logo tease within a friend. Even beyond that, a commentator that's with on point 1, 2, 3. Therefore, I suspect I'm on point 5, and that's some of the time, right? But you're after that, you're distributing that risk. And again, this is, I often don't admit that I'm saying, not giving thought to this, but usually I agree with them. The parroting that as if their opinion, they need to on a particular topic. So you rarely get people really much, and therefore I wouldn't know. And so I'm on on the fence, or that they are just admitting that it's a kind of thing, or that it's not really well thought out. But they've realized that on point 5, they need opinion, so they're referring to be that an expert of some sort, or someone that they're just carrying their opinion over from it. And the second thing is that it might not even be associated to a person. It might just be that there's a particular tribe, school of thought, or policy that comes in a cluster, so that someone's opinion on how, I'll go straight to politics on this because it's often where things are most fraught, is that someone that might have had a really well thought out personal view as to how tiered taxation should be, and then they've given a lot of thought to that. They're calling that point 1, for example, and they've got a really strong opinion on that. But then they might not have given thought as to just what sort of what their opinion is on environmental problems, right? And they have not given a lot of thought to exactly how we should pursue green energy, or what we should do with those sort of complex markets, and how we should go about that as a world, or as a nation, or whatever it might be, right? I'm just giving one example where someone's given a lot of thought to tax policy, and they've got an understanding and personal philosophy around that, because they've been sad enough to potentially scrutinize their own views on it, or they have their own instincts as to how wealth should be distributed. But then when asked, what's your take on sort of wind farms, something like that, or what's your opinion on hydroelectric energy and tidal energy, or something like that, right? And they've not given thought on this in this example. Instead of saying, well, I've never even given it a second look, really, I don't know how efficient those generators are, I wouldn't know where to start, really. Instead of doing that, we see a lot of people then just saying, well, the people that agree with me, and by not just individuals here, but the side I'm on with regards to taxation, says this thing, right? And this is a cleaner example in a weird way for me to talk about the politics of it, is that they're then just piggybacking that and thinking, right, I suspect for whatever reason, I'll just agree and double down with that. And so that, I'm not saying is always to ill, I'm saying that there's something to be said sometimes for sort of loyalty, in-group loyalties, that sometimes assuming that people have given a lot more thought to it than you, and that you agree on fundamental principles, and it may well then be worthwhile. I'm not saying you have to be a sado on an issue by issue basis and study it to death yourself, but just I'm trying to explain that on a conviction model, especially when you don't get into sort of the macro, which is sort of the political aspects, but you think about how that maps onto people's opinions on healthcare or MSK or management of pain and injury, is that if you're doing that on a regular basis, that is going to be more fraught with errors than, say, if you are able to get across something on an issue by issue basis. You're not going to be able to understand exactly where the corners of the weakness of the argument is if you've never really given thought to it, and you're piggybacking opinion on either some level of expertise or trusting someone that's you just sort of, I suspect I agree with them, or you're doing that beyond a person and just thinking that, well, my tribal group thinks this about point 1, 2, 3. Therefore, on point 5, of which I've given less thought to, I'm just going to double down on that. And as I say, the political example is just one of them, but that style of tribal thinking has its place. I can so understand why people maybe think in that direction. However, I'm just concerned sometimes at the fact that if you're always doing that, then you're going to leave yourself vulnerable, in my opinion. I certainly feel that that's where that level of conviction without justification, I think is certainly where people end up vulnerable. And so in the examples here with regards to treating pain and injury, if you're someone that is, say, a MSK generalist, but has given a lot of thought to the way in which you sort of manage the lower limb and how we can manage load, and how, the relevance or not of tissue pathology at different levels or stages of different conditions, and then you're really particularly interested in that, you can get a certain way by doing that and then mapping that onto different body parts. And there's incredible clinicians that are lower limb specialists that can then do a hell of a job even at high levels in the upper limb. But if you're not then understanding the nuances and start treating all shoulders like all knees, instead of just base heuristic and then tailoring it, you're then not considering the unique features of shoulder instability and how that is very different to not just knee OA, but even patellar instability. the neuromuscular factors and the differences of that joint relative to other joints in the body, and that the shoulder is so different in many ways to the knee and the lower limb generally. It hasn't got its perfect correlation. It's not just a shoulder, it's not an upper limb hip, is it? It's more complex than that. Do you see that? It's just another example where if someone's sort of convinced of something and then just thinks that they can sort of retrofit their knowledge onto other body parts, even though they can't necessarily, feel overwhelmed by trying to know everything, that's where I'm concerned. I'm certainly worried about that. And I think that we need to make sure that people have got the maturity to accept when they don't know. And that goes, as I say, on this sort of narrow level with pain and injury and MSK rehab, up the scales, especially when I interact with people with regards to their opinions on policy. It's just like, again, asking them, how do you square this circle? How do you recognize that this doesn't suit your opinion? Have you appropriately accounted for it? And often they have. Like if someone's given a lot of thought to something and they're convinced of it, sometimes because they've given it a load of thought. But if they haven't, then just try to shake that a little bit, both in yourself if you notice it, or in those close to you, because I think that these are the things that seem to be drawing tribal lines around us. Now, there's a lot of cohesion as well, particularly in our sector at the moment. I think there's lots of people that have been working on trying to blur those lines appropriately, and that's great. And I'm not just going to keep banging that drum even though things are changing, but I suppose I'm meaning that even when people do it on a particular level and they're like, well, there's far more ambiguity than you're suggesting, and then in the next breath on another topic, be that sport or religion or politics or the opinions on a particular celebrity character, then suddenly they are behaving as if they know everything about it, and they're not, and they've accounted for all the nuance, and that's irrelevant, and that they, in one hand, can deal with the ambiguity, and in another are blinkered tribal thinkers that then are very divisive and in ways that isn't helpful. And so that's one of the things I'm certainly concerned about. Now, always as ever interested in your thoughts on this as to whether or not you feel that that is something you recognize, whether or not that suggestion of sort of where people, if they don't know the detail, this is the key variable really I'm ranting about today, is that when people are concerned about aren't able to get across all the issues on a point-by-point basis, do they then lean on a sort of ideological heuristic or defer responsibility to some person that they trust, call it an expert of some flavor, and therefore just piggyback their opinion? And when that happens, is that necessarily a problem? Is that the necessary part of the human condition? I think it's always happened, but I'm just thinking that my opinion in this instance is certainly that we're seeing people feel like they need to have a hard and fast and convinced opinion on so many things, that then they can't just do it where they've given thought to it. And so they're feeling obliged to have some sort of, be willing to go to this, the hill that they're willing to die on is one that they've not really studied the landscape of. And that's a major concern, because if people are sort of convinced and blinkered, then they're really vulnerable to propaganda and to people that can really exert influence on them in a less than credible way. So yeah, certainly do give me your opinions on that, especially if you disagree. I always really find that of value. Now, one of the things that people were concerned about when speaking on Monday was this notion that really we are, if you strip it back too far, is what people were saying. So they were saying, if you strip back and everyone's sort of concerned about ambiguity across the board, then what do we do about the fact that sometimes it's stripped so far back that we end up being a dithering and blithering mess? How far back do you strip things so you don't have just, allowing yourself to have some doubts is smart. If you're riddled and crippled with self-doubt, even in areas of which you've got a relative expertise, then that's obviously not going to be of any use to you or to others. I'm concerned about that too. I see an underconfidence sometimes across people that otherwise should be sharing their voice, and an overconfidence by those that are taking up too much room. And as I said in the episode on Monday, of course, I feel like vulnerable, but I invite charges of hypocrisy there if you feel you want to give them. But for those that are certainly dithered and worried about that ambiguity being something that overwhelms them, I always say that how far you should strip it back should be relative to what you know on that topic, and you should be accepting, and that's where I think a comparison to others is smart. So if you allow yourself to think, well, I just don't know, and I've got such significant imposter syndrome that I just can't seem to really get through and really know what is true anymore. You've got this sort of real loss of faith in loss of sense of self, and you've got your self-esteem is at a bit of an all-time low there. Then one of the things that I always encourage people to sort of rebuild around is this notion that it's smart at that point, especially when you're dealing with something professionally, to remember that your expertise is got to be made relative to the patients that you're trying to help, the people that you're speaking to, the people you're working with. That is certainly relevant, and it's incredibly rare. In fact, I've never known of a case in which someone's ended up with this crisis of confidence but aren't understanding that they have a level of knowledge of a topic that's still in excess of the people that they're trying to help. And therefore, if someone's then, as long as they're recognizing that the knowledge that the person they're working with is of a similar level of expertise, but in a different angle, a different area, then on a basis like that, then it needs to be made sensible. And there is a rational overlay that comes to this in saying, look, just there's no point. You're not going to be of much help to anyone, including you'll just demolish yourself if you think that you know so little that it's less than the average person in the world on a particular area of expertise. So in MSK practice, as we sometimes strip back and feel vulnerable because we challenge the things that we thought were facts and then they end up not being, to then assume that anyone that walks in off the street knows more about MSK practice than you, then you've allowed yourself to get carried away on a theme. And so strip it back to basics, trying to understand exactly what do I know about anatomy, physiology, and mechanics that is still relevant. What do I know that I can rebuild on? Divert back to certain things that to maybe be of a more common factual origin. So, go to physics if you have to. Think about what the facts of the matter around things like gravity, and what do I understand about force and load and tissue breakdown, tissue healing, all those sorts of things. It's like, don't be shy to just remind yourself that by knowing those things, by knowing those base characteristics, then you're still going to know more than Joe Blogs and Josephine Blogs when they walk in the door. And that sometimes can help people to just sort of get a better picture of how it might work, and stops yourself being completely vulnerable. Now, the other thing with that is the way in which I would argue you try to build your esteem up in that space is to just recognize that your ability to demonstrate that vulnerability and to be embracing the uncertain is exactly the sort of thing that can get you on a level with patients or anyone that you might be working with. So I'm not just talking about MSK practice here, but just anyone that you're working with, even if it's a family member that you're trying to think through something or problem solve something, is demonstrating that sense of vulnerability and demonstrating and being sharing the fact that you're less convinced than some people feel that you should be obliged to be, is exactly the sort of thing that I would say that I think, because my whole premise is here that a lot of this is false, that people aren't of a deep conviction across various topics because they truly are, they happen to have got to the right answer for all the right reasons. I'm sort of meaning that if that is a bit of a front, or it is something that actually there's an insecurity underneath that, then by being brave enough to be vulnerable and to demonstrate that you're not necessarily across that with as much conviction as people expect you to be, that is exactly the sort of thing that's likely to instigate people to open up to you. And you think about it on a professional level with MSK or healthcare, is that by demonstrating that to people and saying, look, I'm just a bit unsure, this is what I'm thinking with, this is what I'm grappling with at the moment, these are the oohs and ahs I'm weighing up, it's highly likely that that's exactly the space that's meant someone's coming to see you. They're in a situation where if they knew all the answers, they wouldn't be there requesting them for you. And so for them to see you in that similar boat where, and you're unlikely to come across as to be like, well, I've got no more of an idea than you. And I wouldn't say that because I don't think it's true. But you say, this is where I'm at. And then if you think about that on an interpersonal level with family or whatever, if you're talking about something, we mentioned before, if someone says, well, what's your opinion on wind farms, was my thing or something, wasn't it? It's like, if you demonstrate to them, it's a weird one, isn't it? I suppose these are the things that I've not really thought about it much, if it's true. But I suppose these are the things that I'd want to know in order to strengthen my opinion. I wonder if can we gather those facts? Do you know a bit more about that? And you have that conversation. It's highly likely that the other person, unless they are wind farm anorak, that they don't feel like they're obliged to sort of be really forceful and strong in their conviction, and they might well have a more open dialogue about what they know, what you know. You can't, if they do know a bit more, but they're not being masquerading as if they know all the answers, then you might be able to have a back and forth and tease something out and learn something from it, because it's coming from a place of real genuine inquisitive nature. And I think that that's something that people do need to just have that bravery, allow themselves to be vulnerable, and sort of admit that is the way that they want to go about things. And I think that will be contagious. And I think the more people do that, the better, but without then going and being sort of approaching it as if I don't know anything. And I'm a complete, drooling idiot, and I don't know anything, and therefore I'm stripped all the way back. I'm challenging whether the earth is round all of a sudden just because I'm feeling vulnerable, and you've had this utter crisis of confidence. And I think that that's something that I do worry about. I do think that some people make that mistake, but in this instance, I just really can't think that that's a smart move either. So we've got to try and find a way to toe a line. And my war against conviction isn't trying to turn everyone into sort of dithering idiots that strip themselves back so far that they're completely vulnerable. So that's a lot from me. As I said I'd sort of reel off a lot on that, especially in part because we've got guests across the shows all next week, which is exciting. So 5 guests, 5 days, first week of the month. Very exciting. Last thing from me is that many of you are going to be co-listening across the next few days. There's so much interesting stuff going on, but especially if you haven't already, then check out and get tickets to Run Chat Live. You can tune in live to later today if you're late to the game, or buy tickets for tomorrow. You also then get access to all the recordings of that material that's available through therapistlearning.com. So if you haven't already, then please do. I know that I'm going to be I broadcast this whilst it's going on, and so there will be people catching up on this or catching up on Run Chat Live, and so you should. It's a fantastic conference by my friend Matt Phillips, and so do check that out and get that googled. If you haven't already got tickets for it, then you can access the recordings after the fact. Very cool show, and some brilliant speakers that I was listening to this morning and will be doing again this afternoon. So please do check that out. Similarly, if you haven't got your ticket yet for Therapy Live Sport, then we've got the finalized programs all out, and we've got, so I think it's 7 or 8 of the really top athletes, amazing Olympic champions and world champions, world record holders. We announced all of the finalized list and we've basically distributed those athletes across the panel. And as I talked about yesterday, athletes are the patients that we treat within sport contexts. And so getting that voice, getting that narrative, understanding how we ply our trade, and they're the ones that then need to often enact the things that we're advising with rehab, now that we realize that these are participation is so key to therapy rather than it being passive, as we know now. And so getting their take on the matter is so important. So really delighted to see that. And if you check out therapy-live.co.uk, then explore that website, get us some feedback on that. And you'll also notice that there's lots of prizes and offers and things like that for those of you that are joining us in just over a week's time now for Therapy Live Sport. So that's enough from me. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you as ever. And I think let's have a look. I've not got a lot of time for comments, but Simon Smith said, "Are you doing my PDR, Jack?" I'm trying to think what PDR stands for now. It was like a personal review, isn't it? Personal development review or something. Now, I can only assume that someone as mighty as Simon Smith is being sarcastic. But it may well be that even someone as smart and sharp as Simon is one that allows himself to slide on that spectrum from conviction in certain areas to being potentially one that doubts himself in others. So maybe Simon can clarify as to whether or not he says that's the one. Well, Simon, I'm glad it's not just me then, mate, because I have that as well. But fundamentally, that level and sliding up and down on that scale and doubting yourself, but then also trying to pick yourself up and recognize where you're stronger. If even someone like Simon does it, knowing what he knows, then I'm pleased to be in that camp. But I think that there's something to be said for not being afraid to challenge those that are truly blinkered and egotistical in their convictions, but also trying to recognize when it's a front and helping people to understand that there are ways in which we can lean on the fact that people need to stop deferring responsibility to some extent to ideologies or experts, unless they're going to admit that they're doing that, right? If they're just carrying on and sort of being a passenger, then I do worry about that. And I think that is one of my theories really, is that when people can't get across the issues on an issue by issue basis, of which I'm a sado to want to do that, like I want to know what's underneath each of my opinions, and someone that then might come across as if I'm being convinced, but it's usually because I've given some thought to it, and I've rarely given pause for thought if I've taken a deep dive. But I think those concerns are legit, and I'm so excited as ever to hear whether you guys agree with that or not, and whether or not I might be missing something, because I usually am. But in this instance, what am I missing when I see people that actually one of the reasons why they're being so tribal and ideological, and they haven't given thought to something, but they seem convinced, is often because they're having to defer and they've just not been able to get across the topics. And we're increasingly in a society in which isn't happy to say, I don't know. And as I said before, someone even admitting, I'm not sure what I think about wind farms, because they've not thought about wind farms. Why is it that usually it's a certain breed of person at the moment that feels that they need to have a strong, hard and fast opinion and take to the streets about a particular policy on wind farms when they've not given thought to it? No, it's a concern of mine. So just one example, but there's many more. Simon has been too kind to me today. He says I'm talking sense today. I love the fact that he said today, as if, most days full of shit. Today I've done okay. So I'm glad. I'm pleased for that, Simon, and thanks a lot for tuning in. Okay, that's enough from me. And go to Run Chat Live if you've got a ticket. If you haven't already, go to Run Chat Live. Get your ticket, and similarly, I'll see you at Therapy Live next weekend. But next week, guests all week, so you won't have to deal with these rants and rambles as much.